Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar where I'm going to be talking about the backstory behind my recently released book, Avoiding Data Pitfalls from Wiley and Sons, which just published this last week. In fact, yesterday it started shipping. And my name is Ben Jones. I'd like to tell you a little bit about why I wrote this book and also why I think it will be helpful for you and others who are looking to make more effective use out of data. Please do make use of the chat as we go along. There's also going to be a poll, and we're going to have a giveaway for a free signed copy of the book before this is over here in the next hour. All right. So seasonality is an interesting trait of a time series in which we get to see regular or predictable changes that are occurring in a calendar year basis, right? Usually in line with the seasons, summer, fall, winter, and spring. And then anytime we can have a predictable fluctuation or pattern that we see recurring or repeating, then we say that that's a seasonal pattern. And so I'd like to talk about my city right here, Seattle, which I live in. And it's also known as Crane City because I think one source actually says it has the most number of cranes per capita just because of all the construction happening all around as it grows with these large employers and people like myself flocking to the area. And so I'd like to ask a simple question, and we'll use the poll to do that. So I'd like you to take a look at this simple area chart right here. And I'll come back to it at the end, but I'd like to ask you, which permit categories have exhibited seasonality? And so take a look at that area chart. I'm just asking a simple question, right? As you look at these, what these are people as they look to improve their home. Maybe they're adding a fence or a porch. It could even be a skyscraper or a football stadium. It could even be a demolition application. People need to apply with the city of Seattle in order to ask to, get work done. And so the city reviews those applications and they decide whether or not to approve it. And there's an estimated project cost that goes along with it. And this is essentially the department with the city of Seattle that manages all of that. Okay, so it's a simple little question here, and I'm going to, if we could, let's just see here. I'm going to open up this poll. I'm going to launch that poll. Okay, and so then you'll see right there that hopefully, can someone confirm to me if you take a look? I'm just listing off the different permit classes that are there in here in the chart, these different colors that go along with them. And I'd like you to simply just kind of look at it and kind of say, hey, these are the permit classes that I think are seasonal, and go ahead and put those in there. And we'll come back to it, okay? And there's no, need to showcase any one person's responses, so have no fear. We'll just talk about them in general and gauge, what people think about an answer to a question that, on the surface, I'm throwing it at you. So, I just want your gut take. You may not necessarily have time to do any additional analysis yourself, or just as you look at this area chart, which of the categories you think that's seasonal. It definitely exhibits some kind of a predictive pattern there over the course of the year. All right, so thanks for that. It looks like we've got just about a good few dozen of people here who have voted, so that's awesome. I'll leave it open for another minute or so, and then I'll move on with the presentation. So just wanted to get started with a little exercise to make sure we're kind of getting the juices flowing here, analyzing data, making sense out of data like we all do, right? Day in and day out in our jobs, also in our personal lives, also with reference to our communities, even perhaps at a country or a global level. It's our job as human beings these days to make sense of data that's been presented to us in a way that is visual, oftentimes to actually just deal with raw data as well, okay? Oh, it looks like some people were not seeing the poll, but I think that they're able to see it now. Okay, great. Yeah, so I think that it just pops up in there as a little, and I'm getting most of the people responding, so I'll assume for the folks that have found it, that have not found it, don't worry, really just kind of gauging the temperature in the room kind of a thing. Okay, so we'll leave it there. Now, I'm going to go ahead and end that poll. There we go. Okay, and I have my results here. I'll come back in a moment to it here toward the end of the presentation. All right, great. So let's change gears from the city. We just did a little exercise of the poll to this beautiful countryside I want to talk to you about. So I'm curious, does anybody know what mountain this is? And I think it's probably a little bit of a wild card out there, but take a look at that mountain. Do you know what it's called? Do you happen to know? It's a beautiful mountain. I'll give you a hint. It's not Mount Rainier. And number two, it is in my general neck of the woods up here in the Pacific Northwest. And I'm seeing St. Helens, I'm seeing Shasta. It's neither of those, actually. It's probably less well known than both of those. It is actually called Mount Hood, and it is in Oregon. And it's not too far away from Bend, Oregon, if anybody's been to the town of Bend. It's a great place with rivers and an outdoor rock climbing community, and it's a beautiful place. Well, I had the opportunity in 2014 to circumnavigate Mount Hood. I got to go all the way around it with some friends of mine that I knew growing up. And so it was a beautiful experience. This is a photograph I took on the trip. It happened to be beautiful weather. And so as you can see on the left-hand side here, this is a picture of Mount Hood from the top down, as well as what we call the Timberline Trail. And this is the path that goes all the way around Hood. And those are my friends right there. Down there fixing his shoe is a good friend of mine named Luke Barrett. Luke, as we'll mention in a moment, was preparing for multiple marathons that year, 2014. He was also the person who planned our trip. Also shown there is Sean McLeod, a good friend I grew up with who lives in the Portland area as well. And then I'm in there too, proudly sporting my LA Galaxy shirt and hat. And so, as I mentioned, Luke, this marathoner, extremely fit guy, taller than me, he was the one who planned our trip. And now Luke thought it would be a good idea to go all the way around Mount Hood in 2 days, one night. And as you can see here from the National Forest site, it makes it pretty clear that most people do this clockwise, okay, fine, and take 3 to 4 days to complete the loop, not 2. We're talking about a 45 mile trip. So a little less than a marathon each day, hiking up and down and over these hills and valleys as we go around Mount Hood. All right, so day 1, I did fall once in a river crossing and ended up with a little bit of a gash on my leg, but no big deal. We got to this little hut at that evening as the sun was going down, and we called it a night. Okay, so exciting first day, and there we go. The next day, we wake up, and very early in our trip, we were coming across a very scary-looking sign. In fact, all the sign said was, "Don't do it." That's it. That's all it said. And it looks like it was carved, maybe like drawn. We won't call it a Sharpie, maybe some kind of a black charcoal pen or something like that, nailed to a tree. Don't do it. So we're looking at each other. Now, luckily, Luke's brother, Josh, who I grew up with, my college roommate, and he had done a little research, ahead of the trip, and he knew that the Elliott Creek crossing was completely washed out. So there was typically a path that would go over this fast-flowing river, and it had washed out in one of the winter storms. And so, he knew, and we were well aware of the fact that the Timberline Trail crossing wasn't something we could get through, but that there was a rope system set up for people to get kind of around and over and across it. No bridge, but there's a way to get through there. And as you can see, this photograph I'm showing here is actually showing the rope looking straight up. Okay, so there you go. That rope is going straight up and you can climb it. Now, keep in mind, you got 45, 50-pound packs on and you're trying to go up this rope. We, with a combination of the research we had done as well as this sign, made the decision not to go that route. So instead, we had to go another route, which involved going along the spine of a mountain, all the way up to where we could see people practicing on the glaciers as they were learning how to do search and rescue in that area. And then over some boulders, and what turned into what would have, we thought, maybe be a half-an-hour river crossing, turned into a 3-hour ordeal. Suffice it to say, we get to the other side of this river, it's 3 p.m., and we realize we're going to have a tough time getting all the way across. Long story short, we got out of there, but we got back to our car at 11 p.m., pitch black, crossing rivers with our hood lamps on. Not good. So I'm going to come back to that story in a minute, but I'm Ben Jones, and I'm the founder and CEO of Data Literacy, LLC. I wrote another book just around that same year, actually, a book published right around the time of this hike I'm mentioning to you called Communicating with Data with Tableau. And then as of this week, Avoiding Data Pitfalls, my second book is out. So that's me. But as I mentioned, I love to hike and backpack. And so this is a sign from my hometown here in Bellevue. There's a little trail called the Coal Creek Falls Trail. And so as you go up and around, you're pretty quickly coming across the sign that says, "Warning, keep out." And it shows this poor individual falling into what looks like a deadly sinkhole. And sure enough, on the other side of this fence is this big boulder-shaped inverted, bowl, okay, in the hillside. And evidently, with the water running under, there's a good chance that there's some sinkhole kind of behavior happening right there. And so, you don't want to go in there, and they're making that clear. So whether it's the don't do it sign on the Timberline Trail or this warning sign right in my backyard, fairly close to it here, just about a 5-10 minute drive away from my home, I kind of realized that, there's all these signs we come across day in and day out, signs about what not to do, signs about things that are going to, get us into trouble, perhaps problems we might run into. And, we're used to seeing those, aren't we, as it relates to the physical world that we're in. If you review the wisdom text and these ancient works, like the Dhammapada, for example, one of a number of Buddhist texts, as well as the Bible also has interesting verses about this. All these ancient wisdom texts are recommending that you seek out someone who warns you about possible mistakes that you can make. So I love this quote right here from the Dhammapada. It says, if you see someone wise who can steer you away from the wrong path, follow that person as you would one who can reveal hidden treasures. Only good can come of it. Let them admonish or instruct and restrain you from what is wrong. So I love that passage, helping us to kind of look for someone that's going to, know things to tell us what to do, what not to do. But specifically, actually, what not to do. That's really the verse here. The passage is focusing on that. And so, this is more like about our life, not really about necessarily like a trail or a physical world, right? A sign like that, but some kind of a person who can give us a sign about the way to live our life, the way not to live our life, behaviors, actions to watch out for and to avoid. Okay. So then I got to start thinking a little bit about data. What kinds of warning messages are there about data? We're setting off on trails all the time, when we try to make sense of data. And there's so many amazing warning messages, very wise people out there. People like Cole here, okay? Cole Nussbaumer-Knaflick, a good friend of mine. I got to see her last week, and she wrote a passage called Death to Pie Charts. Or Walt Hickey of 538, the worst chart in the world. The pie chart is easily the worst way to convey information ever developed in the history of data visualization. Wow, that's a strong statement. And then also Bernard Marr, a very well-known and amazing speaker in the business intelligence world. Please stop using pie charts. So clearly we can all agree there are plenty of examples of people who are warning us not to use pie charts. But I got to thinking, is that all? Is it just pie charts we need to avoid? That's it? So that's our one little thing to pick on. And then if we ever do that, okay, well, then we've committed some grave, sin of data visualization. Or is that all? Is it just simply that's it? We need to avoid pie charts? And it occurred to me that was kind of the focus was really about the chart choice, ultimately. And that's where a lot of the discussion online, blog posts, social media like Twitter and elsewhere, was really honing in on a very important decision when we work with data, which is, what chart are we going to choose to turn our raw data into visual form? I'm not going to necessarily say that's a wrong choice or a wrong thing to focus on. It certainly is. But I stopped for a moment, and back right around the time I was doing that hike and coming across those signs for the first time and realizing that actually, that's just one of many possible mistakes I could make and have made when visualizing data, when working with data. And then I realized that maybe if I took just a bar chart and put it out there instead of a pie chart, there was a good chance that nobody would say anything. There was a good chance that people would nod and say, well, yep, he's definitely following convention, right? This is compliant by whatever standard you want to apply, okay? Or any guru you pick, okay? That's a person who's going to say, thumbs up to bar charts, so everything's great. But maybe a bar chart could be a pitfall, and maybe I would miss it if it were. And that's what got me thinking about the fact that we weren't talking about all these other unseen hidden pitfalls that we might be falling into while using all of the best data visualization best practices, a phrase I try to avoid because I don't know about best, but perhaps there's better or less effective, more effective. Let's take this bar chart right here, for example. Well, this is taking a look at towing cars in Baltimore. I've been able to go to Baltimore a few times this year to visit a client out there. And, fine city. That's the city where Edgar Allan Poe, we'll talk about him in a moment, grew up and lived some of his life there. and it's a beautiful town there, Baltimore. So it turns out that people, get their cars towed in Baltimore, just like any city. And what's special is that about Baltimore is that they provide all of that raw data. You can just go download it. And so here you go. Here's a bar chart. It's taking a look at about 7 years, I believe, of towing in Baltimore. And I could say that 5,000 or so were Hondas. That's the most common. Okay, 4,600 are Fords, next most common. And then Chevy and Toyota coming in around 3,500 thereabouts as the third and fourth ranked vehicle make that was towed in that city. But if you keep going down a little farther, you start to see Toyota appearing in all caps, and the same thing with Honda and Ford. So we start to notice that there's an issue here with the way we're visualizing this data, that maybe I'm not really accurately conveying to someone else the fact that a certain number of cars were towed in Baltimore in that time period. So here's a good example of this exact case that got me thinking about why I wanted to write this book, realizing that a perfectly good bar chart, might actually be hiding a lot of problems that people might be lulled into a sense of complacency because of the chart choice being an approved and standard chart choice, and yet there being all these issues with it. We can take a look at that data. As you can see, it's from October 2012 through January 2017, so actually more like 5 years right there. 61,000 tows. That's the raw screenshot of the top of the raw data. And as I was mentioning, I was just answering a simple question, which were the most commonly towed vehicles. And here was my bar chart that I got. But I realized it wasn't just a question of capital versus standard or lowercase. I was also seeing some crazy misspellings like Forth and Ford for Ford with 3 R's, or Peterbilt, Peterbelt, Peter Butt, and Pete for evidently a large semi-truck, or Mitsubishi and Mitsubishi. There you go. It's in there, right? This is what we call classic dirty data. Burnt car appears in there one time. Okay. Well, that must have been a crazy scenario. And so, kind of Volkswagen, believe it or not, 36 different ways of spelling Volkswagen. And as soon as I laughed at the person, I realized, well, maybe I wouldn't have spelled it right myself. Wagon with an EN at the end, not an ON. I probably would have gotten it wrong too. 36 different ways of spelling Volkswagen. And so then what's the impact of this dirty data on my analysis using a perfectly good bar chart? Well, one is that you can see at the top here, actually the third and fourth swap, it's actually more Toyotas than Chevys, which makes sense because Chevrolet, it's kind of a French sounding word, I guess, is probably misspelled more often than Toyota. And that's the case, right? So we actually see that Chevy, when we correct as many of the misspellings as we have time to correct, it actually gets leapfrogged by Toyota in the list. And then Volkswagen, as we see, which wasn't even in the top 25, almost is in the top 10. It comes in at number 11. And not only the ranking changes, but the amounts. Instead of 5,200 Hondas, guess what? 7,700 Hondas. So we were off by 50%. It isn't like we were just off by a little bit. There were so many misspellings in this dirty data set, which was eventually keyed in, I would imagine, from perhaps hand-filled out forms by people in these tow lots. We were off by 50%. There was 1.5 times as many Hondas towed in that period of time than we originally thought from our original quick and dirty cursory analysis. All right, so this is kind of illustrating the point of the thing that I wanted to kind of showcase, the thing I wanted to focus on and help draw attention to, that there are many, many other pitfalls that we need to be aware of than simply choosing a pie chart when we maybe shouldn't, when it's not ideal. You get it. So I dedicated this book to my father. Here he is, Richard Jones. He passed away a few years ago. Actually, I have to say thank you to my editor and publishers over there at Wiley and Sons, chief among them Bill Falloon, who I signed this contract only a month before my father's health took a turn for the worse. He passed away in 2015, the year after that Mount Hood circumnavigation. I was already working on the book back then. Can you believe it? 5 years ago. And so he passed away of glioblastoma, the same condition that John McCain passed away of a couple of years ago. And so I kind of lost all sight of the book and why I wanted to write it. It became this thing hanging over my head. I didn't want to work on it. I didn't really care about it anymore. And other things happened thereafter that kind of caused me to really just get derailed. Bill, the entire time, I'm very thankful, was very patient and was very kind and understanding and helping me kind of extend what was originally supposed to be a 1-year contract to 5 years. This man has the patience of a saint. And so again, thank you to Bill. Also, thank you to my dad. He's this amazing guy. He was started up a computer software programming company in the 80s when computers on desktops were a brand new thing. And here we were moving from Canada to the United States. I learned so much about persistence, and I learned so much about resourcefulness, and a person I learned a lot from. But also I learned a lot from my father because he was a person that more than once admitted to me, mistakes that he had made, and helped me really realize that that was a position or a path of strength to take in your life, to say, I think I've made a mistake here and I want to apologize. And so, and even times where I brought in his attention as a young man in my teens or early 20s, probably in a way that wasn't so polite, still in those times he was very patient, and more often than not, just owned up to it, didn't try to hide or make excuses or blame. And I really learned a lot from him. I try to do that a lot. But again, I feel like that in a way is what this book is about. It's about looking at the kinds of things we might do that are not the best choices in working with data, and how can we look at that, and how can we figure out ways to own up to it, okay, and then kind of move on and become perhaps better than we were. So today's my dad's birthday. Would you know that? I just thought it was amazing that it's all lined up like that. He would have been 67 today. And so, we're lucky. He got diagnosed with cancer back when I was in college in 1998. And so at that time, they gave him 3 months to live. And so I thought I was going to lose my father at a tragically young age of 45, not much older than I am right now. But some amazing work by the folks at UCLA. Dr. Clausey, among others, helped him get a second lease on life. He got to see all his kids married. He got to see 5 grandkids born. And so, in that sense, I'm thankful for the folks who gave him amazing care. And so today, November 20th, is when he was born 67 years ago. So great guy. I really love my dad. And so here's the book, and here it is, and it's getting shipped around. It's really rewarding for me to see people messaging me about it and seeing it pop up and on my Twitter feed and all that. So really, really rewarding experience to kind of get it done and get it out the door. And so that's a little bit of the personal story. So here's an overview of the 7 data pitfalls that I came up with for the book. And I don't think that they're all of the pitfalls, by the way. In fact, they're not even all the pitfalls in the book. There's an 8th pitfall I'll talk about at the end. Funny story about that 8th pitfall we'll come to in a moment. I didn't even know that I had done it. I read the entire book. In fact, it was the final draft. And I was sitting there on my couch and had this dooming sense of having fallen into an egregious pitfall. In fact, one I would say is worse in many ways than these 7. So hold on to that. We'll come back to it. But just the idea here is that, there are so many ways to get it wrong. And that can sound scary. And that can sound intimidating. That can make someone want to just give up and not try. But that's not the way we do things. We got to give it a shot. We got to do our best and forge ahead. Just like that trail I went on, find a way around it. Be aware of it. Yeah, it wasn't a fun trip there around Hood, going up and over these boulders and basically scrambling on loose rock with a big pack on. It isn't to say it's easy, but we still forge ahead and try. But also aware of the kinds of things that might pop up, right? So here they are, the 7. I'll just touch on each one of them. I don't really have time to go into them in great detail, but I'll tell you some of the stories. In the book, I try to tell stories, not just give fake examples with fake data of companies that don't exist or something. I try to actually use real data from the real world. Tableau Public, by the way, really taught me that as a fun and fascinating way to learn data. I try to incorporate that into my trainings. Use real data. What about the world we live in? What about something that we all kind of think about now and then? All right, so that's my philosophy with training and teaching. So that's baked into the book, along with some silly stories of things I did totally wrong. So let's just run through them. I'll give you a quick little overview. I have a gift for you all at the end that I'd like to let you know about, and it's going to be showing up in your inbox, and so more on that as well. But epistemic errors, this first one we talk about, is all about how we think about data. It's philosophy. And so, so much of it relates to our thought processes. And so I started off with an example of a massive earthquake that I remember waking up to in the early hours of a January morning in the early 90s when I was in high school, and the Northridge earthquake had taken place prior to the sun rising. And so, taking a look at earthquake data, which is just available now, it's amazing how much data is available. You can go download over 100 years of earthquake data on the United States Geological Survey website. It's amazing. And if you plot the number of occurrences of 6.0 plus around the world since 1900, over 100 years worth of data, we see what looks like almost an alarming rising trend, don't we? If you take a look at this line chart, more and more 6.0 plus earthquakes being recorded every single year. And so that might cause us to be afraid of what's happening down the road if we were to project this forward maybe or forecast into the future. But it turns out that if you split up those earthquakes into 6 to 6.9 in orange, right, or in yellow there, 7 to 7.9 in orange, 8 to 8.9 in red, and then blue is 9 plus, we see that the majority of the increases are coming from that smaller earthquake range. And we think that probably that has a lot to do with all the advances that were made in seismology over the course of the 20th century. And so then our data set isn't telling us the actual number of earthquakes that occurred in the world. It's telling us the ones we measured and recorded and perhaps were aware of. And that helps us understand that there is this San Andreas fault-like sometimes gap between our data and reality. And it's a good thing to be aware of. It's not always something that's top of mind. I think we forget that. Data has the tendency of making us feel confident in what it's showing us. But we need to remember that it's imperfect, collected by imperfect measurement systems, by imperfect people with perhaps different kinds of agendas, okay? And that's not to say that every data set we come across is going to be somehow maliciously doctored. Not at all, right? Many, many times I would like to believe, at least as an optimist, that the majority of the time there's good intention involved. But yet still, there are these problems that are going to be found in every single data set. Even a simple data set like the number of home runs Hank Aaron hit. Hank Aaron was this mythical character for me as a child growing up collecting baseball cards who hit 755 home runs over the course of his career. And you could say, well, there's an example of, there's no gap there, between data and reality. I mean, those 755 baseballs definitely left the park and they were a home run. Like there's no probably like mistake or, I don't know, the journalist didn't forget one day to record it, right? Like, what do you mean? There's no gap between data and reality there. 755 home runs. There you go. That's what it is. It's perfect. That's perfect data, right? But it's actually not, because did you know that he hit 6 home runs in playoff games that are not included? That's 755 regular season home runs. Well, a playoff game, that's when it matters the most, including World Series games, right? That's when it's all on the line. It's win or go home. You're telling me those 6 home runs aren't included in 755? They're not. Also, 2 home runs in the All-Star game when you're playing against the very best of the best of every single team together. Still, he hit 2 out of the park in those games. Not to mention the ones that he hit while he was playing for the Indianapolis Clowns of the Negro Leagues, also a professional league. Why wouldn't we include those ones as well, right? So again, a gap between data and reality in virtually every case. There's always some issue there, all right? And so that's where I try to focus on epistemology. I try to focus on falsifiability, the fact that we need to construct hypotheses that are possible to be proven wrong. Also, just the notion that, we need to be able to be the ones to try to prove ourselves wrong. So often we're just trying to use data to prove ourselves right. But actually what we know from some great thinkers in the 20th century, like Sir Karl Popper, among others, is that it's actually more valuable when your data or your experiment or the information you gather and glean shows that the way you saw the world was incorrect. Well, why is that such an amazing moment? Now you're able to amend your way of thinking, okay? If you get data that just shows you were right the way you've always thought, maybe that's not quite as powerful a moment in time if you think about it that way. The next pitfall, technical trespasses. This one is a tricky one. I would have liked to have written more about this. I think that I need to, actually. It's not quite complete. But I'm talking about ways of working with data that involve some issues there. This is a bridge in Fremont, very close to the Tableau offices where I worked for many years. It's actually, believe it or not, the bridge that goes up and down, the drawbridge, okay, that goes up and down more than any other drawbridge in the entire country, 30 some odd times a day, on account of the fact that it's a little over 100 years old, so it's fairly low. Basically, every sailboat going back and forth has got to, it's got to go up for it. So there's a bike counter on there, as you can see right here, as the bicycle drives right by the bike counter. And you can download the bike count. It's amazing. It's really, really cool, and you can plot it. You can take a look at it. And I did that one day at a luncheon, and I hadn't looked at the data. I was kind of running late. And so when I showed the data to the entire room of people, we saw this massive spike in the bike counts. And we didn't know what it was. I didn't know. They didn't know. We started brainstorming and just throwing out ideas about what we think might have caused it. A race or a bike to work day, or came up with all these different theories about why this spike was there in the data set. Well, 20 minutes later, a person in the back of the room raises his phone and he says, I found out. And we say, oh, interesting. Could you let us know what was the cause of it? And like everything, there's a blog for just about every topic under the sun, including Seattle bikes. And the Seattle bike blog mentioned that, there was probably an issue there with this massive spike, and sharing some correspondence with the people in the city of Seattle Department of Transportation who published the data. It comes to be that, there was an issue, a malfunction, possibly related to the battery with that bike counter on just the one side of the bridge. And so, what was interesting to me in the gut punch moment was when it really kind of sunk that no one, when we brainstormed those ideas, thought to think that there was something wrong with the data. And so we see all these kinds of issues that pop up all the time. Joining data, I talk about some examples of joining data that have mismatching values. Sometimes we miss that, and we miss really important findings because our joins don't line up right. Also cleaning dirty data, as we talked about with the Baltimore towing example. So ways in which processing data, moving it from here to there, can oftentimes lead us astray. So math, it's hard to get the math right all the time, and we do math a lot, don't we? Simple arithmetic many times with our data sets. This pitfall is kind of one where I got to laugh at myself. I'm having to learn that more and more in life, to laugh at ourselves. So I went down to USC in the Los Angeles area. This is a couple of years ago, to teach some health journalists how to use Tableau Public, actually, to work with data. And so I found a data set from the California Health and Human Services about infectious disease occurrences across the state by county, by gender, and all that. So I downloaded the data set. Now, I knew going into it, and I was really gleefully setting up a trap for them, if you will, not because I'm evil, but because I wanted to help them really feel the power of the lesson. That we just started off with a very simple question with this data set, which is how many cases of infectious diseases were recorded in California over the time period we were talking about here. This is the screenshot of the data set. And if you just make a simple bar chart, again, like we talked about here, bar chart looks great, right? There you go. Infectious diseases, guess what? 15 million. Ouch, right? That's a lot of diseases, 15 million diseases. And then we said, okay, good. Well, that might be a good answer to your question. Maybe you would include that in your article. Who knows? But again, it was a setup because as we moved on, we wanted to go further in our analysis and look at it by gender. And so there we have our initial count of 15 million, okay? But what I was setting them up for was that when we look at it by gender, we realize that there are actually 3 values in there. There was a row for males, a row for females, for every single county and every disease possibility, right? There was also a 3rd row in there for every single county, every single disease, and every single year, and that one was total. And guess what? That was the row, the male row and the female row added together. So then if you were to look at it by that, you see, well, wait a second, of those 15 million, 7.5 million are associated with this gender value called total, while the other 7.5 million are associated with male or female. And so we said, aha, we fell into a pitfall, didn't we? And that's because there was a total row in a table we weren't aware of. And so then actually it isn't 15 million at all. It's more like 7.5 million infectious diseases in the state of California. And we moved on. And I thought I'd done a great job as their trainer of showing them this big problem that we had fallen into together. But then you know what happened a little later on? We started to look at it further. And we started to look at it by county. And we realized that if we looked at infectious diseases by county, a little message popped up, thankfully, in the bottom right corner of the view. And it said, 1 unknown. And I had a person raise their hand and they said, Ben, what does that mean? And I didn't really kind of expect it. So I said, oh, well, let's just click on it and find out. We open it up and there you go. We take a look at it. And I realized that there was a row called California in the county list. Now, I grew up in California and I was pretty sure there's no such thing as California County. I know there's New York County in New York State. There's no California County in the state of California. And then just like that, when I was staring at this exact screen, I almost started laughing out loud because I realized it had happened again. Because that total row, every county was listed, but the well-meaning Department of Health and Human Services in the state of California added additional rows at the bottom where the county was not called any one county. You're getting it, right? It was called California, which was what? The sum of all the counties. So then it wasn't 7.5 million infectious diseases in the state of California over that time period. It was 3.7. So it was 4 times higher, our original 15 million count. 4 times higher, not 2 times. I fell into that pitfall while teaching them about the pitfall. Like I said, you got to be able to laugh at yourself, right? That's how it is. But oftentimes I noticed too, over the course of working with some amazingly powerful software tools that exist today that did not exist when I was in college or shortly thereafter. They're mind-blowingly powerful, like a Ferrari. Let's just make that analogy. And it is true, they are. And so it's impossible, though, if you think about it from the point of view of someone creating one of these tools, to think about every possible scenario of every possible data set. That's a big challenge. A lot of organizations are thinking about that right now as they seek to automate insight finding and such. And I think it's a noble thing they're doing that's also perhaps, I think maybe the word is fraught with potential issues that might pop up. But here's an example of that, okay, just to move on. We have Edgar Allan Poe here, right? I talked about Baltimore. This is the town he lived in, grew up in, ultimately died in mysteriously at the young age of 40, how old I was a month or two ago. But one time, actually, it was on the anniversary of his passing, I was interested in knowing how many works he had published over the course of his life, okay? And so I found it. That has 150. And this is not just his poems and short stories that we all know, like The Raven or The Telltale Heart, ones we read in middle school and high school, hauntingly chilling stories, right? You got to love how talented he was. Also, many other types, nonfiction and such, right? 150 total. I thought, well, that was pretty prolific. But then I was just curious, did he what did it look like over the course of his life? And so I made a simple default timeline here and using just clicking and dragging year and then the number of works over. And then I was looking at this, realizing that, I wonder what's the year in which he published the fewest works. So take a look at that real quick there. The perfectly innocent, compliant best practices line chart, if you want to call it that, okay, line chart. In which years did he publish the fewest number of works? Okay, and if you look at that like I did originally, maybe you're like me and you say, oh, well, that would be 1824 and 1825. When we can forgive him, he was a teenager at the time, already publishing at that young age, remarkable as his life was. And we can see there clearly from the line chart that he only published one work in those 2 years. But that from then on afterward, he published more and more and more. But it's actually not the case. It's not true at all. Because if you look closely, let's turn it into what we call a continuous line chart now. And what does it look like? Let me ask you, how many works did he publish in 1826? And you look at that and say, oh, it looks like in 1826, he published 6 different works. There is the lines nice and crossing perfectly there. Okay, got it. And then it went up to what, like 11 in 1827, right? Yeah, 11. How about 1828? Oh, he stayed straight there. He's also 11 in 1828. Fair enough. All right, then what about 1830? And you start, wait a minute. What do you mean? It looks like he published 8.5 works in 1830. How do you publish half of a book? I mean, I bet you Bill at some point in time wanted me to publish half of this book. Joke's on me. What's going on here? No one publishes half a book. You can't do it. So what's going on here is the software we're using is just trying to connect the dots for us. But the dots happen to have missing years in there. Because in 1826, 1828, and 1830, he published 0 works, nothing. And so then in the list of his works and the date that they were published, if you were to aggregate or add up or sum up the number of the count on year, those years would not even be included in the aggregation table. So that means, what does the software do? How does it know what to do? And you might say, oh, the software should just default to always showing it 0. Well, maybe, but what if we're looking at the Olympics where you only have them every 4 years, or elections every 2 years, perhaps, or 4? Do you want it to bounce down to 0 every time then? Of course not. So it's difficult, right, for them to be able to just create this magical, super smart line chart that knows how to make all these little adjustments based on the nature of your data, interesting properties and characteristics that it has, and so forth, okay? So again, a line chart here that, on first blush, misled us, gave us the wrong answer to the question, which is the year in which he published the fewest number of works. All right, so there we go. There's our zeros down there at the bottom. And it took us a while, right? And that's actually part of, I think, the lesson here is that just like with my dirty health data there down in USC, we need to look at it as you look at it more and more and more. Little interesting quirks and aspects of the data start to surface and start to become more clear to you, and that might actually make you realize that a previous type of analysis you did may not be exactly what you thought it was. And so we can box them, perhaps. Maybe that's a different way to do that. We can think of other ways to try to tell the story of his publishing career, over time. Well, statistical slip-ups, there's other full books written about that topic, and I only touch on it briefly, but typically we see statistics broken up into descriptive and inferential. Descriptive, where we're simply looking at summarizing a data set. Inferential, where we're trying to draw conclusions from a small sample, or a sample about a large population, maybe like a survey or something like that. So inferential statistics, I do talk about that as well in the book, and that's tricky business. We're trying to make these inductive leaps from what we've got to what we didn't have, and maybe that's because it was too expensive to get all the data, like the census we've got coming up here. And so then, even in a simple world of descriptive statistics, something where we're trying to say, like, shows central tendency, right? How typical is a value? I think oftentimes we have a pitfall that is probably one of the most common. And that's because we're always looking at averages. We're always looking at values that try to convey to us a typical value for a rather large data set, okay? And so if we consider, for example, football players, and I would tell you, actually this is a true story, that as of last year anyway, when I pulled the roster from the websites, if I average up the variables of an NFL player, the average is 25 years of age, 6'2" in height, 244 pounds in weight, making $1.5 million in salary per year. Okay, so that's your average football player. And if that's all I told you, nothing else, you'd say, oh, I think I have an idea of what like a typical NFL player is. And you'd say, if you were to give me one at random, they're probably going to be, pretty close to all four of these bold values here, maybe with, some difference, but not an incredible difference, not like 10 or 20 times higher or larger or something, right? But the problem is, if you were to show the distributions of each of those four variables, you'd see that they look very, very different in terms of the shape, okay? One in the top left there, A, is very Gaussian. If you can think about it, guess yourself here, right? That happens to be height. Height is very normally distributed, right? In the top right over there, it's a little bit like a right-leaning, positively skewed distribution, okay, with the tail there. Well, that's age, because there are a handful of players over here that make it into their late 30s and 40s, mostly kickers, and, quarterbacks who throw with deflated footballs. Sorry, Kathy. But most likely, you are not going to be in the league into your 40s, okay? And so, but yet, some do continue to make it further along than others, right? So it's sort of like a survival function. Think of it like a small number that just somehow are able to play for longer, much longer than others. The bottom left funky camel-shaped one is weight. And that's so interesting to me because if you think about it, 244 pounds, where's that? That's right about here. And you know what? The thing about that is it's actually not a very typical weight at all. And that's because we've got a few different distributions in there, as we'll see. And that leaves us with this granddaddy of them all in the bottom right. This distribution is gnarly. And it's because there are some outliers over here you can barely even see. There's only one or two players up here that make literally 16 to 20 times higher than the average salary in the league. And that really serves to pull the average much higher than what you would expect. These peaks here are at like $500,000, poor souls, right? But in any case, a very different distribution indeed. We see that a lot with economic variables. Also, not just that, but relatedly, our attention. Think about the number of followers of an Instagram account. You've got your Cristiano Ronaldos and your Beyonces way up there, okay? And so we tend to, as a species, for some reason, follow a power law in our doling out of attention and wealth. It does not follow a Gaussian distribution. And so when we're using the average or the arithmetic average, the mean, to capture typical for a variable that's in dollars or something like that, we've got to be very careful. This is exactly why in real estate, we typically talk about median house price instead of average house price. There might be that one home on the block that's like a mansion someone built that just, is dramatically higher in price than the rest of the homes. You get it. So, again, the point here is that my simple sentence about the average NFL player and what that player looked like was really misleading you. It was giving you the wrong impression about this fact of what it's like to play in the league. This multimodal one we talked about, weight, it's actually Gaussian if you break it up by position. You've got different people, speedy positions that need to get around fast, larger body types that are there on the line of scrimmage trying to, this clash of titans in the middle, trying to gain kind of control over the center point of the field. So, in essence, there are multiple normal Gaussian distributions in there. They're just all put together. Okay. So, but again, that fact wasn't conveyed when I just told you that there's 244 pounds is the average weight. I love this uniform distribution, right? Which is this one, uniform distribution. Sorry, kind of a dad joke, a pun there. That's actually the jersey number. It goes from 1 to 99. There you go, pretty flat. Okay. So, analytical aberrations. So we analyze data. A lot of times when we're analyzing data, we're thinking about predicting what's happening or going to happen. So if we jam back to the 80s, my favorite decade, clearly the best decade, and let's say you were an analyst back in the 80s and you were trying to predict life expectancy in the Korean Peninsula, north versus south, okay, and seeing how long people are going to be living going forward, right? You would dial back the data here and see that actually looks like North Korea is kind of going a little faster there. Now, you may have seen the signs of the times to be able to have predicted that there was trouble ahead, but it would have been really difficult for you to incorporate that into a prediction. We have the benefit here of the data set of rolling it forward, and we see that, kind of sadly, right, that the inhabitants of the northern part of the Korean Peninsula have undergone a little bit of a tough curve there as it relates to life expectancy, as there was, I believe, fairly severe famine in the 90s and things of that nature. Okay, but the point here is that we try a lot of times to fit models to time series. Sometimes it fits really, really well. Like Brazil, it's actually been 0.998 is the correlation coefficient between the increase in life expectancy in Brazil over half a century and the actual data there. Whereas for China, perhaps not the case. China has this interesting little S-shaped curve there. And if we just focus on that and try to fit the best curve to that, we get a polynomial trend that does nothing at all reasonable from what we would expect from life expectancy, even though it has by far the best fit, almost like a perfect fit of the data to this polynomial model. Now, no one's suggesting someone would be thinking to apply a polynomial model to life expectancy. The point here is just that the very best model isn't always any good at all at predicting where things are going. In fact, sometimes it's atrocious at predicting that. And so, again, good to know. How do we actually predict the increase in life expectancy? That's a fascinating question. I don't know if I have the answer to that, but anyway, it's something that I think we can clearly see that using the best model, the best fit model, isn't always the right way. And so analyzing data, again, same thing, right? It's not so simple. Sometimes what seems like it might be the right answer might be woefully inappropriate, right, or wrong. We have this, it's not just extrapolating beyond, it's also sometimes interpolating between. So if I look at life expectancy of these select countries and do a slope graph from what it was in the 60s to just a couple of years ago, right? Not only do we miss the story, well, we miss some pretty obviously dramatic stories. Okay, so some of these countries here exhibiting, not just a nice smooth rise from the 60s to the mid 2010s, but seeing some very bumpy rides along the way there as they dealt with, genocide, really, sadly. Okay, so, this version of the timeline, it's not good enough. It does not tell someone the real story that obviously has tragic human implications to it when we actually go in and decide. Every time we take a time series data set, though, we need to decide how much time between now and the next reading, So there's that resolution, there's that frequency, if you will, that we need to make a decision on. Sometimes different frequencies tell very different stories. It's really interesting. Well, we come to the graphical gaps, which was the entire point to begin with the whole pie chart, right? And it's true, pie charts, they're tough, they're problematic. If we look at this famous one here, infamous rather maybe, the slices don't add up to 100, do they? They really don't. And so Yeah, that's a problem. That's going to be confusing to many people. It's going to give them the wrong idea, right? And I can see why people feel that way. If I show you these three pie charts and ask you what's going on, it's hard to know. But if I then, kind of show them in bar chart form, it's very clear what's happening with these values over the course of their distributions. And so it's easy to see why they're so hated, I guess is the point. But let's say I wanted to know, of these four charts, let's talk about crime in Orlando, switching topics to crime in Orlando. If I talk about crime, which of them is best at telling me that, theft accounts for half? Well, to me, the pie chart does that very well. It's almost perfectly from 12 to 6 o'clock, almost exactly half. Or what if even more, wanted to show you that theft, burglary, and assault accounted for 3/4? That would be even harder to tell with our famous and lovely and very often appropriately used bar chart. Okay, so you can see the pie chart or the tree map maybe do a better job of giving us that notion of 75% or 3/4. So, and if that's the most important point that I'm trying to make in my presentation for one reason or another, then to kind of blindly adhere to this rule that we have to only ever publish data in bar chart form, and we have to at all costs avoid a pie chart, even one with many slices, I think that's just not the right perspective to have, right? So again, match the right chart type to the message, make sure it's accurate, make sure it showcases exactly what you're trying to say, and I think that's the safest thing. I love this quote by Leland Wilkinson in his book, The Grammar of Graphics. He says, "Pie charts have been reviled by statisticians unjustifiably and adored by managers unjustifiably." Just a great quote there. I think that he's true. The truth is somewhere in the middle. They have their place. Is it, as much as they are used? Probably not. Is it never? No, I think that they certainly have a place and an appropriate scenario there. Okay. But not all the time. Like if I wanted to tell you that assault was barely bigger than narcotics, right? I think the only one that does that is this bar chart up here. Of all of these, the only one that tells me assault is just a tiny bit larger than narcotics. They're about the same, but assault just edges out narcotics in terms of the number of crimes. I think the bar chart's the way to go, and even better than a waterfall chart, I need to actually justify them or align them to have one edge in common in order for me to see that one is just a little bit larger than the other. So that's the point I'm trying to make in the book, is that it isn't like there's good charts on the good chart list and bad charts on the never use bad chart list. I think that that's a nice black and white way to look at the world. I just don't think it's the right way to look at things. So to me, charts are like letters. Here's a distribution chart of the amount of letters we use in the human language. Sure, there's E's. We use them all the time. T's, S's. Yeah, there's charts like that. They're really safe. A lot of times they're very appropriate. Most times they're very appropriate. But there's also Q's and even J's. And I don't think anybody's arguing to get rid of those letters. Hopefully, because of my last name, obviously I have a strong feeling about that. But yeah, they're rare. Just don't banish them to the island of never use letters or chart types. They have their place, okay? And because of time, we'll skip another story else I'll save for another day about waking up early and trying to make it to the top of the mountain top and trying to figure that out. I think there's not time for that. But I do want to talk about one more important thing. And that is that I tried to go beyond just this idea of errors of commission. Okay, that's talking about things we do that are wrong. I think there's also errors of omission when we talk about this, and that is that if I wanted to go back to this example of Poe, okay, I've missed an amazing opportunity here to tell a powerful story about a writer who was just visceral in his style and in his content, okay? Because this doesn't capture any of that. It's the bunch of stacked blue boxes. Like, you don't get any feeling at all from looking at this. But if I flip it upside down, something I don't recommend always doing, by the way, and I talk about that, and then I make it red for maybe more like a haunting blood type color, put his photograph in there and what his signature looked like. To me, this tells the story of the career of Edgar Allan Poe and what he published over the course of the 20 some odd years of his career in a whole different way. So missing that, that's to me a sin of omission. I'd like to talk about, just real quick, something I'm going to put in your inbox, right? Oh, let's go back to our poll, and I know we're at the top of the hour. So I asked you which permit classes exhibit seasonality, and here's what you all said. So many said, I can't tell. Okay, that was the number one answer. Many said, next most common answer was all of the above. Next most common answer was single family duplex, the blue one. All right, and then on and on. Okay, so that's the result of the poll. As you can see, people either said, I can't tell, all of the above, or just single family duplex. Fair enough. And then there's some scattering examples in there. But watch what happens with this area chart if we switch the order of the colors. And instead we put blue single family duplex on top. So what's happening here, if we look at them both side by side, is that it looks like there's a nice wave here, and all of the bands look like they're following the wave. But really what's happening is the blue one is the single family duplex is the one that's exhibiting at least the most amount of seasonality, and it's causing the other ones to be bumped up. And so they look like they're seasonal. And so that's why, those of you who said all of the above, fell into that trap of interpreting the area chart as saying that either they're all behind each other. Sometimes people assume that as opposed to stacked. But again, these just are it's just so common for us to make a fairly innocuous chart and then come up with the wrong idea. You might say best practice would be to superimpose these lines instead of stacking them as areas. I'd probably agree with that, but the one thing this loses is the idea of the total number of permits, right? So again, I just wanted to illustrate that. This is a fairly, as I have seen in the list of people who signed up, a very intelligent group. And so again, I do this all the time. It's easy to fall into these pitfalls. Now, what I would like to give you all, you'll see it in your inbox as my way of saying thanks. I spent some time with my amazing designer here in Seattle. Her name's Kelsey O'Donnell. She's going to be at the book launch party tomorrow right here in this building in Bellevue. I'll send a link to that in the follow-up email. Kelsey created for me this amazing checklist, which has got this cool guide showing you the different icons for all the different pitfalls along the way, okay, as well as a checklist. You're going to need to read the book to know more about the eighth pitfall that I didn't talk about. But let's suffice it to say, the story with that pitfall is that I got to the end of the book and I realized that the epigraphs, you know what an epigraph is, right? It's a quote at the beginning of the chapter, epigraph. When I was all done, sitting on my couch, not too far from where I'm sitting right now, for the last and final read before I made sure I gave him the green light to go and print the book, okay, I realized there are 9 chapters in the book. 9 of the quotes were from men. 9. And I realized I've fallen into the trap of taking the world I inherited as a kid. We all inherited, not just me, we all inherited a world that was created by our parents or grandparents, right? They carried it forward, they gave it to us. Well, in that world, men had the voice when it was concerning data. Okay, that's a fact. That's pretty much an undeniable fact. In fact, I go on in the book to talk about at the very end the sources that I used to find quotes about data, and some examples of ones that have woefully small number of female quotes in them. And so then I realized, well, it's my choice. Do I continue to propagate that forward by not paying attention to that and asking myself what I think is the right thing to do? Or do I do something to change that? And I think we're all being called upon to do that right now, actually, where we're looking at this and saying, who has a voice in data? Who has a voice in the world of data? And, let's ask ourselves, who are the people that we're giving a voice to? And then, therefore, who are the people that we're not giving a voice to? I almost fell into what I would consider to be the worst of all of those pitfalls. And I didn't even realize it until I was done writing the book. I consider myself a feminist and an ally for those trying to fight for that. And I fell into it, And again, I got to look at myself in the mirror and say, how did I do that? How did I even realize that I had done that? That's a very powerful thing to come to terms with. I think we're all needing to do that right now, So anyway, that's something I feel strongly about. Take a look at it. I hope you enjoyed the book. Look for the checklist to come through your email. I'm sorry I went a couple minutes over time, but I want to thank you for logging in. I want to thank you for participating in this webinar. Sorry we didn't have more time to chat. I will be doing a quick little, in fact, I'll just do it right now. You guys know how to do this, right? If I do random number generator in Google, you can put a number in here, right? So I have a total number of, let's see how many people I have and what's the best way to do this. I have 45 people. I have 45 people here in the room. Okay, awesome. And so I'm just gonna do a quick little roll of the dice. So 45. Okay, give me generate a random number. It's 26. I'll tell you who won. Give me a second. If you want to hang on, I'll tell you. 1, There's probably got to be a better way to do this. All right, so number 26, and that person is, oh, but it's all by alphabetical order. So be it, right? That doesn't matter. The number 26 is random. So, all right, that person is Kevin Cahill. Kevin Cahill, you and I will chat. You just want a signed copy of the book, Avoiding Data Pitfalls. Kevin, I will make sure to put that in the mail for you before the week is over. Congratulations on that. You are the winner of the amazing Google random number generator algorithm, which you can now know is in your favor, or at least was today. All right. Thank you, everyone. Again, really appreciate your time. I would love it if you would let me know if you get the book and if you read it, what you think about it. Obviously, reviews are huge for people that are trying to get their book noticed on Amazon. So, feel free to do that with your honest opinion about it and thoughts. Shoot me a note. You can get a hold of me. Here's some contact info. There you go. I'm on Twitter, probably way too much, right? But there I am, Data Remix. Also, you can find me on LinkedIn, Ben R. Jones, and then bjones@dataliteracy.com. Shoot me a note. Tell me what you think about it. Thank you all for spending your time in your day to listen to me tell a little bit of the backstory of this book. It's been a pleasure to share it with you. And, I'd love to hear your stories too. I mean, it's easy to make data boring and impersonal. And I think that a big thing I'm trying to do, and I would encourage you to do as well, is include the human aspect of it. I've learned that from people like Georgia Lupi, who has the quote on the back there of the cover, good friend of mine who very much is helping us to see that data is ultimately a human thing, right? So hopefully that was something that resonated with you. One or more of those in there. A lot more examples in the book, so check it out. Okay, thanks everyone. Take care. Have a great rest of your week, and I'll sign off now. Bye now.